It's really lovely to see you all here and your faces, and thank you for coming along. I am a little bit nervous, so I'll try to sort of calm those within the first couple of minutes. And I do get the nervous giggles as well, so apologies. But it's really lovely to meet you. And I've never really told this story in full before, and usually I had to break it down to 5 to 10 minutes for the medical field. So although daunting, it's lovely to know I can share this with like-minded people who get what it's like or are at least wanting to learn or understand about the dreaded mast cell activation syndrome. I'd like you to imagine I'm reading an extract from a book I've written, the best way for me to share my story and not forget any important bits due to a random bit of memory loss. So feel free to slink down into your sofa and open your ears. This is a success story. I am here to share hope and some love to anyone going through a tough time. You can ride the wave and we'll get rewards along the way and in the future. It's important to find acceptance in what you are going through and focus on moving forward. Dwelling or focusing on being stuck will not help to unleash your inner fighter. There is always a way. It might not be what you imagined it to be, but acceptance early on saved and enabled me to have a purpose and not give up. So my story started in early 2016, where being a musician, I was performing with friends in a restaurant. We had the best night and was offered some food afterwards. I did mention my peanut allergy, and unfortunately a mistake was made, and I ended up having a dish that contained some kind of peanuts. It was a spicy dish, and so at first I was confused by the heat and anaphylaxis, but it soon became apparent that it was anaphylaxis and developing with speed. I quickly phoned 999 and requested an ambulance and passed my phone to someone in our group and then nipped to the bathroom, in part because I was potentially going to be sick, but also I didn't want to cause a scene. Subsequently, my symptoms developed, which I had not experienced before. My whole body went numb, I developed a rash all over, and I had pins and needles everywhere. I also had this feeling of passing out. My torso was also burning and painful, and I was shaking a lot. I ended up in recess and monitored to the early morning. I was eventually discharged and sent home, but I did start to experience secondary reactions. This has never happened before. When previously after anaphylaxis, I would bounce back on day 2, but sadly this time, the week after, I was still in a pitiable state. The months continued and I would experience extreme fatigue and sleep a lot. While singing big notes, I would have a searing pain from the top of my head through my left eye and down my face. It was so bad that I would end up holding my hand up to my eye, putting pressure on it, and continued singing until it had passed. I pushed through and thought maybe I was experiencing bad headaches or not sleeping enough. In early June, I was invited out to an amazing songwriting retreat in the Andalusian mountains. I have to say this was one of the best weeks. I still feel so warmed by this experience and met some incredible souls and mentors, who I now see as lovely friends from all over the world. During this week, I was feeling not myself and was incredibly thirsty all the time, which was odd. I just kept drinking and drinking. I remember I would have a few alcoholic drinks and felt horrendous, so opted out. And I've really drunk since, to be honest. When it came to flying back, I was sad but so happy that I'd had such a life-changing week. The flight home, I was sat next to a wonderful older lady and we chatted the whole flight, but I was feeling quite lightheaded and at times struggled to focus. We arrived back in the UK, hugged and said our goodbyes, and I was greeted by my lovely friend Amy, who came and picked me up to take me back to Cornwall. We had the usual giggles and catch up, but I soon realised something was not right. My legs were swelling and I could not feel the right side of my body. A rash developed all over my body also. I would dig my nail into one side of my nose and then the other, and then repeated this on my legs, then my arm and my face. One side was definitely completely numb. I was also a bit wibbly wobbly. We arrived back at my parents', and after some umming and ahhing, we went straight to A&E. We got called in to see the nurse, and while assessing and stating it could be a 4-hour wait, my mum and the nurse suddenly looked at me and said, "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" and spotted that my lips were swelling and I was going into anaphylaxis. I apologised profusely. You'll come to realise I do this a lot, the turnip that I am. The nurse then responded that don't apologise, you've just got yourself to the front of the queue. She dashed out, grabbed a trolley and then they both helped me on and wheeled me straight into resus. They pumped me with the usual meds to halt the anaphylaxis and took a load of bloods, some to be sent to Bristol for tropical disease testing. 2 doctors also suddenly thought I may have meningitis and stripped me down to my torso and pressed a glass against my skin. With a sigh of relief, they counted that out. They then brought my mum and I a lovely cup of tea and sent mum home to bed as it was the early hours of the morning. I was in recess most of the night for monitoring and soon sent me to a side ward in the early hours to wait for a neurology team to come and assess why I could not feel anything, but also to fathom why I had developed muscle weakness in my arms and legs. The team soon arrived later that morning and talked through everything that had happened. We were in high spirits, trying to see the funny side of my situation and quietly trying to hide that I was a bit scared. In a comical moment, I heard the ping of the glove and quickly turned around to see the neurologist putting on his gloves. Without even thinking, I said, "Oh my God, you're not going there, are you?" And he replied, "I'm afraid so." He tested both sides of my body for weaknesses and numbness and then asked me to roll onto my side. I just lost it giggling, nerves, embarrassment, but I couldn't stop. And the team then also caught the giggles. And the neurologist, after what felt like 2 minutes of hysterical laughter between us, said, "Well, at least I know your muscles work," while still having a digit in a place I rather he didn't. I was in for 3 to 4 days and made it out on my birthday. They did find that I was seriously B12 deficient, so they started me on loading injections for 2 weeks. And then after a week, I was less like Bambi on my legs. But soon the symptoms came flooding back. The summer was a challenge, and this is where Detective Suzie made her first appearance. I started looking up on my symptoms and went on a whirlwind on B12 deficiency, and that some people do need to have regular B12 injections, as without it you can have debilitating symptoms. The symptoms got progressively worse to the point that I could not walk unaided. I carried on my gigs, but I was still finding that every day my right side was numb and I had muscle weakness and intense bone pain. I also started having random mild reactions to things. I did have 2 A4 pages of symptoms recorded, so this became my guide in August, where I spent most of my time on my laptop and typed in my symptoms. I was eventually directed to a hospital in Colorado, which specialists were talking about mastocytosis and mast cell activation syndrome. Classed as a rare disorder, I was like, "Oh my God, this is possibly what is wrong with me. It all fits." Guess what happened when I took this to the docs? I was shut down and specified that we can't take anything seriously from the US. In fact, one doctor mentioned that people spend money for healthcare there and can be told anything. I had printed off all the info for B12 to prove how desperately I needed to have the regular injections. It took weeks of pleading, and luckily it stated to give regular injections if experiencing visible symptoms on the NHS website. Come September, they were stopped by another doctor and another fight came and I was allowed them again. This happened a further 2 to 3 times until Dr. M came to the rescue. I have to stress that they were a tremendous help. They probably gave me about 45% battery life, and the more I had, the more percentage I would get, but it would never really go over 60%. Throughout the next 6 months, I had every test going: full body MRIs, X-rays, extensive bloods, endoscopy, providing samples, examinations, and also a lumbar puncture, which sadly caused me to be sofa bound for a month after. There were a lot more A&E visits. We exhausted nearly every NHS specialist available. Everyone was speculating what was going on and what could be the cause of all my symptoms. But what they all agreed upon is that the incident in early 2016 was the main trigger. So at least they had a point to work from. Around this time, I started losing hair and I saw a trichologist who stated she could see where I had experienced the big anaphylactic trauma, all from under a magnifying glass. I was very impressed. I did chat with a wig specialist as well because the hair was falling out quite rapidly, but luckily in the end, it did stop. And I think that was partly due to the increase in B12 injections. So I was relieved. And I think a lot of the time during this process, I always found it difficult when I had visible symptoms and sort of making others feel uncomfortable when they probably didn't feel uncomfortable. But it's something that has always been there. But it was a super tough time over the years. I saw nearly 30 odd specialists, doctors, nurses, both NHS and private. The majority were private because we were desperate, probably a familiar story of chasing dead ends. They knew and had heard about MCAS, but were specifically told by the NHS board that it was not accepted because it was not proven to be a real thing. But one thing I did not give up on was hope. I always held my head high and tried to stay focused on the end goal. For a diagnosis or for someone to at least acknowledge and help us all fight this together. Of course, there were down days and times, and I felt like I could not do it anymore because not only was I physically exhausted, but mentally too. The part I found the hardest was trying to convince family and friends that I was going to be okay, because what they were witnessing was a shell of my former bouncy self. My parents and my partner, Matt, had on several occasions thought I had passed away because I barely moved for hours and was shallow breathing. I often was woken up and all I could see was fear in their eyes. That was definitely something I struggled with the most, but it gave me the drive to push and not give up. If I couldn't really do it for me, I could certainly do it for them. We, of course, had great times amongst all this. We are a family of humour and light. Dark humour helps through the tough times, which especially are hard to process. Many, many giggles brought the sunshine in there, and I have some magic memories from those times too, which we still recount and laugh about. I was disciplined in how, and if my body said no, I had to say no. I would wait, or I'd stay in bed or just rest because I could feel that I wasn't going to be able to do much. But if I had the smallest amount of energy, I would be like, let's go, let's get some sunshine, beach, get out of the four walls I was mostly residing in. This did not happen as often as I would like, but what I did have was a goal of being able to get to the garden with my crutches. This is where my inner Attenborough Monty Don finally freed themselves. I'd say Charlie Dimmock, but I prefer to wear a bra. The crutches and the B12 injections gave me some freedom, but the reaction started to increase. And then in August 2018, I had another big anaphylactic reaction, not long after I performed at a festival called Board Masters. But this is where things got really a lot worse. I used to have a lot of memory loss, unbeknown to me, in all honesty, but my family and Matt would be the first to mention about my memory and share that times it was getting quite bad. Although on some occasions, I'm convinced it was to benefit their own mishaps by cheekily blaming me. Around this time, I was also diagnosed with Graves' disease, so started some medication for that. It seemed to be at a mild and very low level at that time, so that was a very positive thing compared to everything else. I didn't feel I could focus. I felt like I was not getting a lot of oxygen to my brain. I was sleeping a lot and barely left the house or my bed. I was in pain that I had not experienced in my life, but deep bone pain, and trying to walk or get out of bed was super challenging. I'd often fall to the side. My body felt swollen and stiff. Also, at times, the numbness and muscle weakness had spread to all over my body, and the rashes worsened. My legs would often just give way beneath me. I'd wake in the mornings with an inflamed body and felt pretty awful. I was regularly on a nebulizer also. It just seemed as though my body was shutting down, and there was not a lot I could do but just continue my late night research and not give up. Around this time, someone did diagnose me with having chronic optimism, and that not only made me laugh a lot, but it really struck a chord with me. I loved it, and it stayed with me ever since. I just don't want to give up. I tried oxygen therapy as my symptoms worsened, especially in the winter. I would nip outside and stand on the cold paving slabs in the garden just to get some relief for my feet. I did find that the majority of the time, if I kept moving in the mornings, things did improve for my symptoms. I can imagine your curiosity with all of this, but with my feet, my toes would be unable to touch the floor as the pads on my feet were so swollen. But I have to say, there was a lot of out loud, oh, that's so good moments when I stood outside on those mornings. The reactions would increase and I would further deteriorate after each one, but especially the anaphylactic ones. Rashes became all over the body frequently. Airborne reactions came flooding in and were sadly quite regular. It left you feeling incredibly anxious, not knowing what was safe around me, so I avoided eating out or meeting friends because most reactions would leave me bedbound. I also didn't want to react in front of anyone and cause a scene again. At this time, many reactions were a mystery, and a lot of the time I had no idea what had caused them. Sometimes we knew it was peanuts, but the majority of the time we had no idea. When I did discuss what I was experiencing with the specialists, I was told that airborne reactions did not exist. My first ever airborne reaction was on set filming for Doc Martin, and we were in a room for the scene where there were bowls of peanuts dotted around. Never before this was an issue, and then suddenly I started going into anaphylaxis. And I have to say, I would love to sit with some of those specialists now to see what they have to say, because it is much more recognised now. Hence why peanut-free flights are so important. We flew to the Isles of Scilly once, and the flight was a 10-15 minutes max. They notified the tiny plane of 10 passengers that they were not to eat peanuts during the flight. A middle-aged couple behind us started moaning about the fact that they could not eat nuts. Bearing in mind the length of the journey, it's the first time I felt my blood boil over something like this. They were getting heated over this fact and that it's not their problem if someone dies. They had no idea who the passenger was, but imagine if it was a child hearing this. Managing any allergy in this life is tough enough, and to pipe up about a 10-15 minute flight was just bonkers. So I hope in the future things do get better for a lot of people on flights. What was also really interesting, there were times that we had to fly to appointments in London, up north, etc. And the flight actually exacerbated my symptoms. So I'd have to be wheelchaired or use disabled assistance in airports. This meant getting around a little challenging, especially in London, but always had a warm welcome and a giggle with the staff. I'd always have a B12 injection right before the flight and also take antihistamines, as sometimes they would start having an allergic reaction. But this combo definitely helped. I was losing this battle, and on top of this, every time I ate, my stomach would swell up and was incredibly painful, so I'd often go to sleep. Codeine and morphine were my best new friends, although morphine made me feel sick, so not the greatest of friend after all. So here comes the part where we started to go up the mountain rather than rolling down it. It was around this time a very special friend who heard my plight introduced me to a wonderful retired professor who was a pinnacle in helping me get to where I am today. We went to see him at his home and relayed everything from start to that day. He believed me and agreed it certainly was not all in my head. At this point, some house dust had made its way into my eyes and I needed a tissue or two. The relief was amazing. We met a few times and he supported my research, and we regularly shared papers and music to one another. To this day, I feel he saved me somewhat. I shared my thoughts on MCAS and he requested to meet with my lovely GP, Dr. M, who also was integral to my journey turning around. He drove nearly 2 hours and sat in the surgery and went over everything with her. It was the real turning point for me, and not long after, I saw a further 2 specialists and they were understanding about MCAS. Hooray! So Matt and I made the journey up to London to St Mary's Hospital, sceptical over how it was going to go, having been to London and around the UK being let down by various professionals over the previous years. We walked up the steps to the Lindo wing, the same steps many royal baby was introduced to the world, and sat anxiously waiting to be called in. Professor Senavaratne gave us a warm welcome, and we relayed the same story as we had so many times before. He sat then and said, I suspect you may have a histamine intolerance, but we do need to do a 24-hour urine test. He scribbled down some notes and sent us off to Harley Street Clinic for bloods and to organise a urine kit. This is where it gets glamorous. Because it was a 24-hour test, we had to book a hotel, bearing in mind the empty gallon container I was given needed to be kept cold. So off we went to M&S and we grabbed some nibbles, bottled water, 6 bags of ice, a cool bag, and some large paper cups. I successfully did what I needed to do, and by morning, Matt had to nip off for a meeting and I had to make my way back to Harley Street with my impressive tinkle sample. Can't believe I'm relaying this. Come to checkout time, the lovely team were keen to help me with my bags. One eager gentleman came and said, I'll take your bags and help you to the taxi. Without a chance to say anything, he grabbed the cool bag handle and was almost wrestling with me, saying, I'll take it. And I was like, no, I've got it. It's absolutely fine, thank you. But he would not stop. So I looked him straight in the eyes and said, you really don't want that one. It's got a large tinkle sample in it. He immediately released and took a couple of steps back. We both laughed out loud and he walked me to the taxi with my other bags. It was not just any sample, it was an M&S sample. I made it to the clinic and they happily took my prize gallon of gold. it was not until January 2020 we got to go back to the lovely Professor Sanavarani, and he sat us down and looked at his computer. He looked at me and said, oh, sorry. So, Suzie, you have mast cell activation syndrome. I burst into tears. The release was unbelievable. All the years of fighting, and there it was. Not only was I right from August 2016, but all the fear, the anxiety, the people knocking you back saying it's all in your head. I was right. My gut was right. And it was the most magical moment. We were sent home with a prescription and a plan. And my word, it felt bloody good. Sorry about that. The next couple of months, I started on my sodium crom and things seemed great. I felt like I was on the up, and I ended up meeting my friend Daisy in London, and we went to see a gig. A few whispers of COVID were on the news, but we had the best night seeing an American artist and then headed back to our friend's apartment in Notting Hill. The next morning, lovely Boris appeared on the screen announcing that COVID was here and we all need to stay away from each other. So I swiftly headed back to Cornwall on the train, thinking I'd be safe down there. Matt was up north and I was alone in the house in Cornwall, which it is how it stayed for nearly 6 months. We could not see each other apart from FaceTime. Sorry, Matt. Within a week of being back home, I was feeling rough, and then I really turned. Sadly, the next few weeks, I deteriorated to quite a bad state. I was rushed into hospital 6 times, and each time they were worried about exposure, especially with my mast cell diagnosis. By this point, a couple of the doctors understood my condition, which was just a delight. So they would send me home, and I was on a nebulizer 8 times a day. It felt like someone was sat on my chest. I was exhausted, but did, again, my research and discovered that in New York, they were treating people with vitamin C injections. So I ordered double strength vitamin C tablets. I was on antibiotics, 9 steroids a day, my mast cell meds, thyroid meds, inhalers, nebulizer, an extra huge bag of vitamin supplements. But I had a lovely routine and also had my many big shops delivered to the house with the gallons of orange juice, just to see if that would help. One particular week, I was going downhill quite quickly, and the pain in my abdomen, my chest, and my breathing were incredibly concerning. I had an oximeter, which reads those levels, and my oxygen levels were dangerously low. My temperature was sky high, and I had various GPs and paramedics regularly on the phone from my surgery. I did end up going into A&E twice that week, and still they were petrified that if I stayed in, they were worried about the exposure killing me off. So I was sent home, which seems quite, whatever the word is, quite mad. But at the time, I felt so much for the NHS staff. They were unreal, exhausted. But each time I went in, the routine process changed every time, and they struggled to know if they were coming or going. They also were not allowed to test me unless I stayed in. But of course, they didn't want to risk that. But they were clearly stating I had COVID. Each time I was given oxygen to try and boost my levels. That week, I kept getting worse and I could not move from the sofa. I was honest with my family and Matt that I was unsure if I was okay or not. I think it helped them not being able to witness the live version, if I'm honest. Deep down, I was going to sleep every night, unsure whether I was going to wake up. But I was weirdly at peace with it all. There had been some wonderful weather, and if I could have made it outside to the garden, I would have. Getting about was an extremely slow process and took a long time, but I managed to feed Tiggs the cat and get myself some food and liquid. Tiggs had been a fantastic sidekick throughout all this and would always be near where the trouble spots were. During my COVID experience, she would regularly try to lie in my chest, which obviously wasn't the most comfortable, and other times my legs when the pain was at its worst. She somehow knew. Clever. The Friday of that week, it was all over the news that a lady with the same symptoms as mine had been ignored and told to stay at home, despite the paramedics being called twice during that day. This really brought home and made me feel a little bit scared. The poor lady, who was a nurse, subsequently passed away as it was too late. The following week, I had a checkup call from the GP who had been assigned to me during that time, and we talked through everything, and he said he suspected I was very lucky to be alive considering my conditions and symptoms. He also got me to check my oxygen levels, which was still very low, and my temperature was super high. But I'd improved a little. For the next 6 months, I had a rollover of continuous chest infections, was on a lot of antibiotics and steroids, but whatever I was doing was working. And although it was traumatic, I still felt at peace. Also, some will say I was foolish for working throughout all this, but it gave me a purpose and I got to use my brain. I work from home from a wonderful company called Small, and I am indebted for the support and purpose they provided throughout those years. I think if I had known it was such a risk in hindsight, maybe I could have called in sick, especially during that intense week. But maybe it's one of the reasons I pulled through. In this time, what was fascinating is that long COVID was linked to MCAS, which I really feel enabled the birth of it being taken more seriously. I did have COVID several times after this, but the last and final time, I was quickly given antiviral delivered from the hospital in a taxi of all things. And as I was on the vulnerable list, and within a day, I felt like I was reborn. It did something and I was better for what seemed like months to a year. It definitely kicked off or triggered an energy and clarity that I had not had for years, and I barely had any symptoms. I definitely think this is something to note for future, for treatments, maybe for MCAS. It has been a ride. I still get relapses, but overall still far from those worst moments that I've experienced in the past. When I was bedbound, I dreamt of one day getting to the coast, and then it developed to walking the Cornish coast to Alsacilly and the Three Peaks, something I never considered in reality. So when I was able to walk normally, I set about plotting my mission for Mast selection. I've had some setbacks, but it's not a race, it's a journey and a highlight. I'm ready to get back on the salt path and help raise awareness, but also help me fulfill my dreams. There have been some amazing people join me, which makes it so much sweeter. So many faces and friends have come so far, and it's been pure magic. So please feel welcome to come along if you want to in the future. During these 8.5 years, I was able to do some film extra work, which was a lot of fun. I appeared in Poldark, Doc Martin, Delicious, to name a few. It was so lovely for the soul to meet with others and feel human again, and of course, get out. I also did continue with music as much as I was able. It did dwindle during the really bad years, so was limited with what I took on. At the beginning of this journey, I did have some wonderful interest from lovely people in the industry and also in being signed. I was in talks with some fab peeps who I'm still in touch with today. Music is a powerful tool for good and can really lift us out of some difficult places. I found that it is what always gave me a buzz to do that, knowing it could help others. Last year, I was actually invited out to Sweden and Denmark to sing on tour with the band, and it was so much fun, but also helped me fulfill my dreams of travel, which was something I daydreamed a lot about when stuck in these four walls. This summer, I am also off to sing in Norway and so excited to be with those lovely souls again. When I return, I am set up for some more songwriting sessions and finally get my bug back for music and hopefully release them. Like with what I am doing today, if it reaches just one person and makes a difference, then it's so worth every moment of time doing it. This 8-year journey has been challenging, retracing my steps, and I forgot how lost I was in between. But it's also helped me to heal and not dread looking back. I truly want anyone out there struggling to know that even when things are incredibly dark and you cannot see out, it's important to look to the small things that bring you joy. Mine for a long time was gardening. Just being able to plant a few things and watch them grow over the years gave me a sense of achievement and of growth, not just visually, but from within. I do recommend writing out your own story and seeing how far you have come. Anything that can help. I saw a lovely cancer for a bit because I was struggling to process a lot of these things. It did do me the world of good. My situation came at a time where there was nothing online that could support me or even within our NHS. So by doing this, I hope it gives hope, some peace, and most of all, some reassurance and drive to get up and go get help. Sorry. Do not give up or back down, because everybody, including you, deserve the world. Mast Cell Action are together so they can help link you up to the people that matter and that can hold out their hands to pull you up. And just remember, you've got this.